The flashing red and blue lights washed over my front lawn, painting everything in chaos. My quiet street, usually so still you could hear the crickets, now looked like something out of a cop drama. 3 police cruisers sat parked at odd angles, their lights reflecting off mailboxes and windows, while curious neighbors peeked from behind curtains. And there, at the center of it all, was Patricia Garrison, arms flailing, voice cutting through the air like a siren of her own. "There he is!" she shouted, jabbing a finger toward my porch. "That's the man who attacked my guests. I want him arrested right now." I stood still, one hand in my pocket, the other holding my phone. My security footage was already queued up, ready to play. On the outside, I looked calm, composed even. But inside, I felt that deep, simmering mix of irritation and satisfaction. Patricia had finally gone too far, and she had no idea just how much trouble she'd just created for herself. 6 months earlier, I thought I'd found paradise. After years of cramped apartment living, I wanted peace. A place where I could breathe, mow my own lawn, and maybe learn my neighbors' names. Maple Grove Court looked perfect. Neat houses, trimmed hedges, and streets so quiet it almost felt unreal. Then I met her. Patricia Garrison, the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac. She wasn't just the HOA president, she was the HOA. She ruled this little suburban kingdom like she'd written the Constitution herself. Her white colonial home looked straight out of a magazine, paint flawless, hedges so precisely trimmed they looked like they'd been measured with a ruler. She was the kind of person who smiled with her teeth, but never with her eyes. On my second day, she showed up at my door with a clipboard and a forced smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, before immediately reminding me about grass height regulations and approved mailbox colors. I nodded politely, telling myself I could tolerate a little micromanagement if it meant living in a peaceful community. For a while, it worked. But paradise doesn't last long, not when Patricia's around. 2 months later, her community gatherings began. Every weekend, she'd turn the communal space behind our houses into her personal party ground, wine glasses clinking, music blaring, gossip echoing through the night. She called it neighborhood bonding. I called it free chaos with snacks. The problem? My backyard connected directly to that area, and Patricia's guests didn't seem to understand boundaries. They'd wander into my yard like it was an extension of the party. Beer cans in the flower bed, cigarette butts near my patio chairs, muddy footprints on the grass. At first, I let it slide. Cleaned up quietly. Told myself they were just being careless. But the moment I found 2 cars parked in my driveway, blocking my garage like it was public property, I realized this wasn't accidental. So I asked politely. Every single time. And every single time, Patricia brushed me off with that same condescending smile. Then came the night everything changed. It was a warm Saturday evening. I came home from work looking forward to a quiet night and stopped dead in my tracks. There, right in the middle of my yard, stretched a volleyball net, half on my grass, half in the communal area. My flower bed was crushed. My birdbath was toppled, and Patricia's guests were laughing like they owned the place. I walked straight toward her. She stood beside a folding table full of snacks, wine in hand, chatting like a queen at her banquet. "Patricia," I said evenly, keeping my voice steady, "your volleyball net is on my property, and someone's destroyed my garden." She barely turned to look at me, just a little wave of her hand and that infuriating smile. "Oh, don't be such a stick in the mud, David. We're all neighbors here. A little community fun never hurt anyone." I forced a calm smile. "I understand. But this is private property. I need your guests to stay in the common area." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't back down. "Well," she said, voice dripping with smugness, "I'm the HOA president, and I say it's fine. The boundaries aren't even that clear anyway. That one line told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't ignorant, she was testing me. That night, I decided I was done playing her game. If Patricia wanted a battle, I'd make sure it was documented. By morning, I'd installed security cameras covering my backyard, driveway, and side gate. I printed private property, no trespassing signs, and posted them along the fence. If she wanted to keep pretending the lines were blurry, I was about to make them crystal clear. And sure enough, by the next weekend, Patricia's community gathering was bigger and louder than ever. The music shook windows. Laughter carried down the street. And despite the signs, her guests once again poured right onto my property. One couple made themselves comfortable on my patio furniture. Another group used my garden hose to fill their cooler. And I recorded every second of it. On Monday, I sent Patricia a formal certified letter. In it, I clearly stated that neither she nor her guests were permitted on my property. I attached screenshots from my security footage showing the trespassing and damages and copied the entire HOA board for good measure. That night, she stormed up my driveway, letter crumpled in her fist, her face flushed red with fury. "How dare you threaten me with legal action?" she hissed. "I've been HOA president for 8 years. I know every rule, every regulation. You cannot ban residents from community activities." "Patricia," I said calmly, "I'm not banning anyone from community activities. I'm banning them from my property. There's a difference." Her face turned a shade of purple I didn't think was humanly possible. "You'll regret this, David, I promise you that." The next Saturday, she proved it. Another massive party, another round of mocking glances toward my signs, another deliberate invasion. By 7 p.m., I heard a crash, the sound of pottery shattering. I checked the security feed and saw 3 of her guests laughing as they knocked over my brand-new ceramic planter while chasing a frisbee. That was it. This wasn't an accident. It was a declaration. I stepped outside, keeping my voice even but firm. "Excuse me," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You're on private property. Please leave immediately." A man in a Hawaiian shirt gave me a smirk. "Patricia said you were uptight." "Come on, man, we're just having fun." "Fun or not," I replied, "you're trespassing. Leave now or I'll call the police." They grumbled, muttered, and slowly shuffled off. Across the yard, Patricia stood watching, arms crossed, that smug smirk plastered across her face. She wasn't sorry. She was daring me, and she was about to regret it, because while she thought she was playing a game, I was building a case. Later that evening, I sat in my living room, sipping coffee and watching the live feed from my backyard cameras. The laughter from Patricia's party echoed faintly through the walls, but I didn't care about that anymore. What I cared about was evidence, clear, undeniable proof that she and her guests were violating private property laws, because at this point it wasn't about noise. It wasn't about broken planters. It was about control. Patricia had built her entire identity around running this neighborhood like her personal empire. And when someone stood up to her, when someone like me refused to bow, she didn't just get angry. She got vindictive. I knew it was only a matter of time before she pushed harder. I just didn't know how far she'd go. Around 8 p.m., I caught movement on one of my side cameras. 2 figures slipped through the side gate. The one clearly marked private property. No trespassing. They weren't just wandering, they were sneaking. One of them tried the handle of my garage door. That was the moment my patience broke. I stormed outside, cutting across the yard. "What are you doing by my garage?" I shouted, my voice sharp. The woman jumped like she'd seen a ghost. "Oh, Patricia said you had some folding chairs we could borrow." I stared at her, stunned. "Patricia," I said slowly, "has no authority to give anyone access to my property. You're trespassing, and I have you on camera trying that door handle." The man muttered something under his breath, but I didn't catch it. They both bolted through the gate and disappeared into the shadows. And that's when I realized something dark. This wasn't random misbehavior. Patricia had sent them. She wanted me angry. She wanted me to lose control, to shout, to overreact, so she could twist it all back on me. But that's not what happened. Instead, I spent the rest of that night saving and backing up every second of footage. I even uploaded copies to cloud storage. If Patricia wanted war, I was bringing the receipts. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of knocking, loud, insistent knocking. When I peered through the peephole, 2 police officers stood on my porch. My stomach tightened. I knew exactly who had sent them. I opened the door. "Good morning, officers," I said evenly. "David Lawson?" The older one asked. "Yes, sir. We received a complaint that you threatened and assaulted guests at a community event last night. We need to ask you a few questions." I almost laughed. Almost. Patricia had actually gone through with it. "Officers," I said calmly, "I have full security footage from last night. Would you like to see it?" The younger officer nodded. "That would be helpful, sir." I led them into the living room and played the recordings on my laptop. They watched in silence. Every trespass, every broken planter, every smug grin from Patricia's so-called guests. When the final clip ended, the older officer turned to me, eyebrows raised. "Mr. Lawson," he said slowly, "it looks like you're the victim here, not the suspect." "That's what I've been saying," I replied evenly. They exchanged glances. Then the younger one spoke. "The caller claimed you physically assaulted her guests." "That's completely false," I said, pointing to the footage. "I never laid a hand on anyone. I asked them to leave verbally. That's it." The older officer sighed, straightening his belt. "We're going to need to speak with the complainant. Do you want to press charges for trespassing and attempted burglary?" the younger one asked. "Absolutely," I said. From my front window, I watched as the officers crossed the street toward Patricia's pristine colonial. She opened the door with her signature flair, face perfectly composed, voice loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. At first, she gestured wildly, speaking fast, probably rehearsed her lines in the mirror before they arrived. But as the minutes passed, her confidence began to crumble. Her voice got quieter. Her hands slowed. 20 minutes later, Patricia Garrison, self-proclaimed queen of Maple Grove Court, was being escorted into the back of a police cruiser. Her face was a perfect storm of disbelief and fury. The officers returned to take my full statement. "Miss Garrison is being charged with filing a false police report," the older one explained. "We'll also be pressing trespassing charges against the individuals shown on your video. You'll need to come to the station tomorrow to complete the paperwork." "Of course," I said, keeping my tone calm. But inside, I felt the weight of 6 months finally start to lift. As the patrol cars pulled away, blue lights fading down the street, neighbors began emerging from their homes. I could see it on their faces: curiosity, shock, maybe even a bit of satisfaction. The woman who'd ruled this neighborhood like a dictator had finally been knocked off her throne. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. In the days that followed, the story spread through Maple Grove Court like wildfire. I kept my distance, content to let the truth do its work. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that Patricia wasn't the kind of person to accept defeat quietly. She'd spent years intimidating people, bending the rules to her will. The thought of her sitting somewhere, plotting, replaying that night in her head, it didn't sit right with me. Then 3 days later, I got a notice in my mailbox. A letter from the HOA board emergency meeting, attendance required, no other details. Just a date, a time, and Patricia's name in bold at the top. I wasn't sure if it was a trap or a reckoning, but one thing was certain. The entire neighborhood was about to find out who Patricia Garrison really was. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. Thursday night at the community hall, the same spot Patricia used to host her so-called neighborhood gatherings. Only this time, there would be no wine, no music, and definitely no laughter. When I arrived, nearly every seat was already taken. Neighbors who usually kept to themselves were suddenly front and center, whispering in tight clusters. You could feel the tension humming through the room. For years, Patricia had controlled this neighborhood through charm, fear, and manipulation. But tonight, the illusion was cracking. At the front of the room sat the HOA board, 5 members who, up until now, had mostly nodded along to whatever Patricia wanted. But they weren't smiling tonight. And then, right on cue, the door opened. Patricia Garrison entered. She was dressed immaculately, as always, a crisp navy suit, hair perfectly styled, but something about her seemed off. The confidence that usually radiated from her was gone, replaced by a tight, forced smile. As she walked past, I caught her eyes for a brief second. There was no smugness this time, just calculation. She took her seat at the front table, clearing her throat. "Before we begin," she started, voice trembling slightly, "I'd like to address the false rumors circulating about my recent arrest." A murmur rippled through the room. Patricia continued, "I was the victim of a misunderstanding, one that's been exaggerated by people who don't appreciate the responsibility of maintaining community order." That's when the board chair, an older man named Frank, raised a hand. "Patricia, we've reviewed the police report, the footage, "And the complaint," he said calmly. The board felt it was appropriate to call this meeting because what happened isn't just a misunderstanding. It's a pattern. Patricia stiffened. "A pattern?" "Yes," Frank replied. "Multiple residents have come forward with concerns about your conduct as HOA president. Tonight we're here to hear them, and that's when it happened." One by one, neighbors began standing up. The first was Linda Turner, who lived across from Patricia. She told how Patricia once fined her $150 because her trash bins were visible from the street for 10 minutes after pickup. Then came Tom and Judy, a quiet retired couple. Patricia had threatened to report them for having unauthorized garden decorations. Even Sarah Chen, one of the guests from Patricia's last party, stood up, her voice soft but steady. "She told us David's backyard was community property," Sarah said. "She even showed us what she claimed were official HOA maps. They were fake. None of us would have stepped on his property if we knew the truth." The room buzzed with disbelief. Patricia's carefully crafted reputation, the responsible, civic-minded HOA president, was unraveling right before everyone's eyes. She tried to interrupt, raising her hand. "This is absurd. These are isolated complaints from people who don't understand HOA structure." Frank's expression didn't change. "Patricia, you filed a false police report. That's not an isolated complaint. That's a criminal act." For the first time, she looked rattled. When my turn came, I stood up slowly, the weight of 6 months of frustration finally pressing into my words. "I moved here because I wanted peace," I said. "I respected the HOA rules, kept my property immaculate, paid my dues on time. But Patricia decided that wasn't enough. She used her position to bully, to invade privacy, to bend laws for her own ego. I didn't want to fight, but she brought it to my doorstep, literally." The room was silent. Even Patricia didn't interrupt. I continued. "I have every second of her actions on video. I didn't come here tonight to humiliate anyone, but people deserve to know the truth. And the truth is, Patricia Garrison abused her authority for years. For a long moment, no one moved. Then someone started clapping, slowly at first, then louder. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in applause. Patricia sat frozen, jaw tight, face pale. Frank cleared his throat. "Given the evidence, I motion that we remove Patricia Garrison from her position as HOA president effective immediately. All in favor?" Every hand in the room went up. Unanimous. Patricia's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked around the room, searching for one sympathetic face, but found none. The same people she'd ruled over with her clipboard and her regulations now looked at her with something between disgust and pity. The gavel came down. The vote was official, but even that wasn't the end. Frank continued, "Furthermore, we are enacting a bylaw preventing any resident found guilty of criminal conduct while serving on the HOA from holding office again for a period of 10 years. You..." Could almost hear Patricia's heart drop. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the tile. "This is a witch hunt," she snapped. "You're all ungrateful. None of you understand how much I've done for this neighborhood." Her voice cracked on the last word. And then she turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. After the meeting, neighbors gathered outside under the glow of the streetlights, their conversations buzzing with disbelief. For years, Patricia's word had been law here, but now, for the first time, people were laughing, light, genuine laughter, the kind that had been missing from Maple Grove Court for too long. Frank approached me quietly. "David," he said, "thank you for handling this the right way. Not everyone would have stayed calm through all that." I nodded. "I just wanted things to be fair again." He smiled faintly. "They will be now. We've already chosen a new interim president, someone who actually believes in community." For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But Patricia's story wasn't done just yet. Because while she'd lost her title, her real punishment was still to come, and it would hit her harder than anything the HOA could dish out. After the meeting, things around Maple Grove Court felt different. For months, tension had hung over the neighborhood like a storm cloud. But now, it was finally gone. People who used to rush indoors the second they saw Patricia coming were now standing in driveways chatting. laughing, even planning a community barbecue, something that hadn't happened in years. Still, there was one question lingering in everyone's mind. Where was Patricia? A week passed. Then another. Her once perfectly kept house sat eerily still, blinds drawn, porch light off, mailbox overflowing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, but the truth was far less mysterious and far more humiliating. A month later, an article appeared in the local paper. Former HOA president faces civil suit over misuse of funds. Apparently, during her reign as president, Patricia had been quietly redirecting HOA maintenance money into a neighborhood improvement account, an account that coincidentally only she controlled. Nothing huge, just small amounts here and there, but over time it added up. Thousands of dollars. It didn't take long for the new board led by Frank to hand everything over to investigators. And once the audit began, Patricia's empire started to crumble for good. Within weeks, she was facing not just civil penalties, but a possible criminal charge. Her once spotless record, gone. Her name, which used to strike fear, now drew nothing but disbelief and mockery. I'll never forget the day I saw her again. It was a quiet Saturday morning. I was trimming my hedges when I noticed a familiar figure walking down the street. Slower, smaller somehow. It was Patricia. She was wearing sunglasses, her hair tied back in a loose bun, no clipboard in sight. For the first time, she looked human. When she noticed me watching, she hesitated, then slowly walked over. "David," she said softly. "I wanted to apologize. I didn't say anything." She took a shaky breath. "I went too far. I thought I was keeping order. I thought people needed someone to enforce things, but I lost myself in it. I'm sorry for what I did to you. And to everyone." For a moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in her before. Honesty. Maybe even regret, but it didn't erase what she'd done. "I appreciate the apology," I said quietly. "I really do. But peace doesn't come from control. It comes from respect," she nodded slowly. "I know. I just wish I'd learned that sooner." And with that, she turned and walked away. No grand speech, no drama, no clipboard. Just silence. By summer, Patricia had sold her house and moved away. The for sale sign came down within weeks, replaced by a young family with 2 kids who turned the backyard into a mini playground. The sound of laughter filled the street again. It felt like the neighborhood had taken a deep, collective breath and finally exhaled. The HOA board changed too. Under Frank's guidance, things actually worked. Meetings were open, votes were fair, and neighbors' opinions actually mattered. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One evening, during the first community barbecue since Patricia's departure, Frank raised a glass and said, "To better neighbors, fair rules, and lessons learned." Everyone cheered. And as the sun dipped below the trees, I realized something important. Sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. It looks like peace. Weeks later, a small white envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address, just my name. Inside was a folded note written in neat cursive handwriting. "Thank you for standing up when others wouldn't. You reminded me what fairness looks like. PG. No money, no excuses. Just words." I never saw her again after that. But the neighborhood she left behind, that's what mattered. For the first time in years, Maple Grove Court wasn't ruled by fear or fines. It was ruled by community. Kids rode their bikes freely again. Porch lights stayed on late. And sometimes, when I looked at my fence, the same one Patricia once called non-compliant, I'd just smile because it wasn't perfect. But it was mine. And that, folks, is how one power-hungry HOA president lost everything, and how one neighborhood found peace again. If you enjoyed this story and want more unbelievable HOA dramas, real-life revenge tales, and satisfying neighborhood justice, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video. This is HOA Story Files, where every fence has a story, and every story has its fence. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.